print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 11th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you, as always, for joining us today. The highlights under Business and Finance are: year-over-year inflation hit a 3-year high of 4.2% in May, in line with expectations as the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's control of the strait has become a major flashpoint in the war, as Tehran has sought to close the waterway to ships since the U.S. and Israel began the war on February 28th. Trump has since demanded that Iran reopen the strait as part of any deal with the U.S. On Wednesday, he said the U.S. had been clandestinely guiding some ships through the strait, through which about 1/5 of the world's oil once traveled. After the latest strikes began, the military denied claims by the Iranians that the Strait of Hormuz was closed, insisting commercial ships continued to transit the waterway. Trump, a Republican, is pivoting back toward a war footing after months of failing to reach a diplomatic resolution with Iran, despite repeatedly saying a deal is close. Earlier Wednesday, he rallied against Tehran for not agreeing to his terms. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Musk's fans fuel SpaceX launch. The company's IPO is expected to set records Friday and make its CEO a trillionaire. By Hannah Aaron Lang and Corey Drybush. Dean Nouri wants in on the biggest stock market debut of all time. Elon Musk is counting on it. Nouri, a 41-year-old fintech entrepreneur, spent years listening to Musk's video and podcast interviews. Tesla stock makes up some 85% of his net worth, and when shares of SpaceX start trading, he plans to buy. What's there to think about? Nouri said. He doesn't consider himself a Musk fanboy, just a believer in the tech founder's vision of a multi-planetary future powered by superhuman artificial intelligence. You have a limitless industry with Elon Musk at the helm, Nouri said. On Friday, the SpaceX stock ticker is expected to make its debut in the biggest initial public offering of all time. Musk plans to raise close to $75 billion in a deal that could make him the world's first trillionaire. The stock offering also will be a landmark moment for everyday investors in Wall Street's retail revolution. Over the past few years, individual investors have coalesced into a market-moving force, upending hedge fund bets, salvaging struggling companies, and sending favored stocks straight to the moon. Total volume for both retail stock and options trades reached new records in May, according to Citadel Securities. World's great powers learn they have limits. Ukraine managed to turn the tide of the war against Russia. By Yaroslav Trofimov. Great powers, it turns out, don't have as much power as they thought. After taking office last year, President Trump pushed a might makes right vision to remake the international order around a U.S. sphere of influence, a worldview not that dissimilar from Russia's or China's. The future seems shaped by an oft-repeated line from an ancient Greek historian, Thucydides: "The strong do what they will, and the weak suffer as they must." The saying, originally uttered by invading Athenian forces to the doomed islander of Milos in 416 BC, featured prominently in Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's speech that sent ripples through the international conference in Davos in January. At the peak of Europe's spat with Trump over his plans to seize the Danish island of Greenland. Yet now it seems that the weak aren't as weak as many had believed. The strong can't really do what they want either. Despite sending a significant part of its long-range munitions and killing a large part of the Iranian leadership, the U.S. military hasn't been able to secure a strategic victory over a middle power such as Iran. Tehran continues blocking the Strait of Hormuz. Its theocratic system is still in solid control and maintains the ability to lob missiles at Israel and Gulf states. Ukraine hasn't crumbled either. Trump cut off U.S. aid more than a year ago and put a diplomatic squeeze on Kyiv to surrender its eastern region of Donetsk as part of his understanding with Russia at August's summit in Alaska. Despite that, Ukraine has turned the tide of the war against Russia, holding the front line and inflicting increasingly painful strikes on the Russian heartland. These developments showed how much technological advances, such as drones and much cheaper precision missiles, have leveled the playing field between the smaller states and the great powers that are spending hundreds of billions of dollars on their armed forces. Across the world, this narrowing of the power gap has limited what military might alone can achieve. China is watching these trends closely as it contemplates whether it could or should seize Taiwan. The U.S. and Soccer, well, it's complicated, by Joshua Robinson and Jonathan Clegg. Soccer in the U.S. has never been treated like any other sport. It has been loved like an underground band, ridiculed as a poisonous foreign import, and for most of its history, roughly ignored. But if the U.S. is in a position to co-host the largest ever World Cup over the course of the next 5 weeks, it is because of a bubbling undercurrent that sustained the game in the country for over a century. Today, it boasts one of the best attended domestic leagues in the world, a men's national team that is consistently ranked in the top 15, and a vibrant soccer culture. 16 years after Beckham changed soccer in the U.S. by simply arriving, he managed to do it again by finding the one player who was more of a global icon. By 2023, Beckham was an MLS co-owner after exercising an option to establish an expansion team that he secured when he joined the LA Galaxy as a player. And for his Inter Miami, he knew just who he wanted: the Argentine World Cup winner, Lionel Messi. Leveraging the league's partnerships with Apple and Adidas, Beckham made Messi the highest paid player in the history of U.S. soccer. And overnight, Messi put Inter Miami on the map. Everywhere the team traveled, ticket prices soared. His jersey was instantly the top seller in the league. And for those who remembered America's days as a soccer backwater, it marked the ultimate endorsement. This is not Messi's league. He is our league. Playing for Inter Miami, said Garber. Now we are a pure soccer nation with vibrant leagues at all levels. Next on the docket, James Madison's drinking habit. Rise of originalism is sparking bizarre debates on the Supreme Court. By James Rameser. Do drug users have a constitutional right to own a gun? The answer may depend on what the Supreme Court thinks about the drinking habits of the Founding Fathers. Can states count mail-in ballots that are postmarked on time but arrive after Election Day? That may turn on a long-forgotten voting practice from the Civil War. As the Supreme Court works through its busiest month, its docket is chock-a-blocked with tough cases on modern-day problems. More than ever, the justices are looking deep into the past for answers. The time machine is driven by the ascendance of originalism, the legal philosophy pioneered by conservatives that says the meaning of the Constitution's words shouldn't evolve over time. Though the theory has been fashionable for decades, the court's conservative supermajority has embraced it with new fervor, sending attorneys scrambling for historical nuggets that once were more useful for trivial pursuit. The more this form of analysis gets extended, the stranger it becomes, said Jonathan G. Knapp, law and history professor at Stanford and a critic of originalism. Second Amendment cases are at the forefront of lawyers' efforts to amass historical ammunition. That's thanks to a 2022 Supreme Court ruling that significantly expanded the right to carry a gun. The court decreed that today's gun regulations are constitutional only if they are consistent with early American historical traditions. Since then, lawyers across the country have argued over what those traditions are. One dispute, pending before the justices, challenges a federal law that prohibits people who use illegal drugs from possessing firearms. The trouble for originalists is that drug addiction wasn't a well-accepted concept in the 19th century. So during oral arguments, Justice Neil Gorsuch and others focused on a potential parallel: alcohol use at the time of the founding. In those days, states commonly passed laws restricting the rights of habitual drunkards. But Gorsuch, who co-wrote a children's book titled Heroes of 1776, noted that many of the founders were themselves heavy drinkers. John Adams took a tankard of hard cider with his breakfast every day, Gorsuch sternly told a government lawyer who was defending the gun ban. James Madison reportedly drank a pint of whiskey every day. Thomas Jefferson said he wasn't much of a user of alcohol. He only had 3 or 4 glasses of wine a night. If using intoxicants automatically disqualified someone, Gorsuch seemed to suggest the very people who wrote the Second Amendment would have been disarmed. Advocates of originalism say this sort of backward-looking reasoning is the only way to prevent modern judges or legislatures from abridging individual rights ratified in the Constitution. In the case about mail-in ballots, much of the fight is being waged on a battlefield from 160 years ago. Republican and Democratic lawyers squabbled over the details of Civil War field voting, when ballots were collected from Union soldiers and transported back home after the election. The question is whether that practice is an apt precedent for state rules that govern mail voting today. That's why legal briefs in the case are riddled with citations to an obscure 1915 book by a Boston lawyer named Josiah Henry Benton, who argued that historians had overlooked the practice. Lawyers also dug up archaic legal tracts and 19th century dictionary entries defining the word election. Not surprisingly, both sides say the past supports their present position. The same is true in perhaps the biggest case of the term that could hinge on history, the challenge to President Trump's bid to end birthright citizenship for children of undocumented immigrants. The magical year in that case is 1868, when birthright citizenship was enshrined in the 14th Amendment. The administration argues that the right was never intended to sweep as broadly as it has long been understood. To defend that position, the administration dusted off old newspaper articles, speeches, and other documents that many historians say don't reflect the true view of the 14th Amendment's ratifiers. One such artifact is an unsigned, undated, and unpublished letter found in the papers of President Andrew Johnson. Chief Justice John Roberts appeared unconvinced of the administration's historical arguments. Roberts is the only member of the conservative majority who doesn't readily identify as an originalist. Ironically, he may be the biggest history buff of them all. So when Trump's Solicitor General peppered the court with historical citations, it was notable that they fell flat with the chief. The examples you give to support that, Roberts told the Solicitor General, strike me as very quirky. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Also, an update on the Knicks game last night. They won 107-106, so they have won 3 games to the Spurs 1. From the editorial page, Trump needs a new Iran strategy. The regime has taken advantage of weakness amid the ceasefire. After weeks of insisting a deal with Iran is around the corner, President Trump may be admitting the reality. The regime is tapping the U.S. along in negotiations, he said Wednesday. The president has given diplomacy a chance, but they keep playing us for suckers, he added. Is Mr. Trump ready at last for a new approach? For 9 weeks, the ceasefire has let Iran dictate events in the Gulf. The regime gets to start each skirmish shooting at U.S. forces, U.S. allies, or commercial ships, and then decide when the exchange ends. Iran has also used Hezbollah to fire on Israel, only to cite the resulting fighting in Lebanon as an excuse to stall talks with the U.S. Each prior Iranian attack has sent Mr. Trump racing to de-escalate. This meant forcing ceasefires in Lebanon and then blaming Israel when Hezbollah kept shooting, or playing down Iranian fire on U.S. troops as a trifle, meriting love taps in reply. Iran's large strike on Kuwait's airport was not a big deal, Mr. Trump said. A mere tit for tat. He said the same of Iran's Sunday strike on Israel, urging it not to reply since the missiles didn't hurt anybody. That logic leads to trouble. Only by a miracle did 2 U.S. pilots survive after an Iranian drone struck and burned inside their Apache helicopter near the Strait of Hormuz on Monday. Yet Mr. Trump's earlier reaction was to say that this, too, wasn't a big deal, criticize the idea of returning to war, and have U.S. Central Command announce that its response would be proportional. CENTCOM says it hit 20 air defense targets on Tuesday, and Iran fired back in the Gulf. Given Israel has also hit reconstituted Iranian air defenses, the combined effort could prepare something larger. But Mr. Trump limited Israel's strikes and previewed his own in public. When the U.S. says proportional, Iran hears weak, offering the regime such forward guidance signals that Mr. Trump still fears a return to war. Iran may reply with greater force if it strikes again, as the president said he would as early as Wednesday night. Mr. Trump won't want to hear it, but he has been dancing to Iran's tune. He will have to break from it to go down as losing the war politically, despite the early military gains. It's not too much to say the president faces a similar choice to the one George W. Bush faced in Iraq in 2006-7. The insurgency was winning, and Mr. Bush needed to shift his strategy to accept defeat. He chose the surge and broke the insurgency, and the U.S. was able to maintain influence in Iraq and the region. Mr. Trump had hoped for Iranian concessions, but he abandoned much of his leverage by showing he wouldn't countenance a return to war. Iran's regime has taken advantage, as Mr. Trump now acknowledges. The president also said Wednesday that a U.S. secret mission since May has helped 200 ships and 100 million barrels of oil escape the Strait of Hormuz. We took out the other night 22 ships late at night with no lights, he said. That's why oil is $85 a barrel. That's progress and essentially a resumption of Project Freedom. While the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports imposes severe cost on the regime. But the strait is still largely closed to commercial shipping. Some 130 ships transit Hormuz each day pre-war. CENTCOM's Admiral Brad Cooper has a plan to escort ships and open the strait in earnest. But Mr. Trump doesn't want to take the risk. Iran's regime thinks it can hold out longer than Mr. Trump can, and he has fed that belief with his refrain that peace is a few days away. The way for Mr. Trump to right the ship is to go on offense, but that means more than pounding Iran. The task at hand is to open the strait to Allied ships. If the U.S. blockade endures while Iran's breaks, the war is won. Mr. Trump could also join Israel in an operation to seize or destroy Iran's enriched uranium. That's high risk, but it is the surest way of removing the fuel for a nuclear weapon. Another idea is to use U.S. air power to create a safe zone inside Iran for regime opponents. The U.S. belatedly created such a zone for the Kurds in Iraq's north in 1991. This would give Iran's regime something to worry about besides shooting beyond its borders. A safe zone would increase U.S. leverage and further endanger the regime's control. Mr. Trump still hopes for a diplomatic breakthrough, but even the press's favorite unnamed Pakistani officials are now downbeat. As long as Iran believes Mr. Trump is stuck with no alternative, it will squeeze him in the talks and in Hormuz. The president's choice now is to alter the facts on the ground or leave the conflict in a worse position than Mr. Bush did in Iraq. Democrats and the Plattner Standard. The main Democrat is the left's equivalent of Republican Ken Paxton. Graham Plattner won Maine's Democratic nomination for Senate on Tuesday, and the party elites are rallying round the man with the Nazi tattoo. It's a notable look for a party that has spent a decade trying to disqualify Donald Trump from political office over his character transgressions. Representative Ro Khanna campaigned with Mr. Plattner on the weekend, following news that the Mainer was physically rough with a former girlfriend and texted sexual messages to many women who weren't his wife. The Silicon Valley progressive, who has designs on the White House, called Mr. Plattner's actions misogynistic and shameful. But, well, he's their misogynist. Here you have a case of someone who had a dark chapter in his life, who was in toxic relationships, who's ashamed about it, who served this country, and the Maine voters are saying, look, let's give him some grace, Mr. Khanna said. Okay, we'll look for signs of Democratic grace the next time a Supreme Court nominee is accused without evidence of sexual harassment. Senator Bernie Sanders also offered an apology for Mr. Plattner, who reportedly had an account on Kik, K-I-K, a largely anonymous private messaging app known for its sexual content. The Journal reports that Mr. Plattner's account featured a mirror selfie of him shirtless with only a towel around his waist. We cannot continue to allow the Republican Party to control the Senate and push forward Trump's oligarchic and authoritarian agenda, wrote Mr. Sanders on social media. And there is only one candidate who will do something about it. Credit Mr. Sanders for candor. His support for Mr. Plattner is solely about electing a Democratic Senate. Nothing else matters. Never mind that Maine's incumbent, Senator Susan Collins, is Mr. Trump's most forthright GOP critic in Congress and has a long scandal-free record. Democrats say, with cause, that Republicans do the same when they nominate the likes of Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who was indicted, paid restitution in a pre-trial diversion deal, and was impeached for corruption. He's now the GOP candidate for Senate after President Trump endorsed him over the scandal-free Senator John Cornyn. And everyone knows Mr. Trump's florid history. But Democrats have spent a decade deploring Mr. Trump as unfit for office. In nominating Mr. Platner, they've tossed aside that standard in favor of one that says any candidate is acceptable who can win for their side, no matter the record or behavior. As Barton Swaim writes nearby, primary voters now prize someone who fights over someone honest and admirable. Don't be surprised when you get the government you voted for. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages, Scott Pelley's idea of journalism. Why would anyone think 60 Minutes is biased? Consider what happened to me. By Karl Rove. The New York Times Sunday interview with Scott Pelley, formerly of CBS's 60 Minutes, is a gobsmacker. Fired last week, Mr. Pelley mourned the end of his 37-year career at the Tiffany Network, enraged at Philistines who took over the show on which he worked for more than 2 decades. Even now, Mr. Pelley doesn't seem to comprehend why he was fired. Let me help. At an all-hands meeting with the new executive producer of 60 Minutes, Mr. Pelley asked Nick Bilton why he'd taken that job, knowing that you will never be welcome here. Then Mr. Pelley accused the CBS News editor-in-chief, Barry Weiss, of murdering 60 Minutes. Summoned afterwards by CBS President Tom Sabrowski, Mr. Pelley expected he was going to have a long conversation. Being fired was the furthest thing from his mind. He was stunned when it was a short talk, followed a few hours later by an email telling him he was canned. Did Mr. Pelley really think he could keep his job after telling the new leadership they were incompetent boobs with no right to tinker with the perfectly running machine he and his colleagues created and maintained? Mr. Pelley, like many others in the elite media, is out of touch. Though he wasn't present, Mr. Pelley says his colleagues were shocked when Miss Weiss asked a meeting of CBS journalists, "Why does the country think you're biased?" The answer to Miss Weiss's question is, because so much of the legacy media is biased. An October 2025 Gallup poll found a record low 28% of Americans had a great deal or fair amount of trust in newspapers, television, and radio to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly. Some of the decline stems from a growing distrust of all public institutions, itself an expression of our country's severe polarization and the centrifugal forces of social media. But much of it comes from their sense that journalists, especially those from national outlets like 60 Minutes, are insular and biased against flyover America. Most of those journalists live in New York or Washington. As Mr. Pelley explained, my colleagues and I have worked together 10, 20, 30 years. We travel together. We dine together. We go into literal combat together. Given this, these bonds are pretty tight. When asked how he's feeling about being fired, he said, "No joke. It's like your spouse was murdered." I've had personal experience with how this can lead to bias in someone like Scott Pelley, namely Scott Pelley. In February 2008, he interviewed Jill Simpson, a small-town Alabama lawyer, on 60 Minutes. She claimed that in 2001, when I was a White House aide, I asked her to gather evidence against the state's then governor, Don Sigelman. As Mr. Pelley put it in interviewing Miss Simpson, Karl Rove asked you to take pictures of Sigelman in a compromising sexual position with one of his aides? This was sheer nonsense. I'd never met Miss Simpson and never asked her or anyone else to snoop into the governor's activities. As far as I know, Mr. Sigelman has never been credibly accused of adultery. But there was Mr. Pelley on camera expressing amazement at this alleged dastardly deed. What evidence did Mr. Pelley collect to confirm Miss Simpson's account? Collaboration by others? Receipts from travel to Washington? Evidence she was compensated for the months she claimed she spent trailing Mr. Sigelman? I doubt it, as no such evidence existed. If Mr. Pelley had undertaken due diligence and ideology or partisanship hadn't entered into his decision-making, he would have concluded her story was suspect. But the Jill Simpson tale was just too juicy. If the details were identical except that it involved a Democratic rather than a Republican president, I can't imagine Mr. Pelley pursuing it. If he's honest with himself, I think he'd agree. Basic due diligence would also have stopped CBS's Dan Rather from alleging that Mr. Bush used political connections to join the National Guard in 1973. Not to was fake, based on a document produced with Microsoft Word, which didn't exist in 1973. Mr. Rather resigned. Mr. Pelley claimed in his Times interview that Miss Weiss put a thumb on the scale for the Trump administration in CBS's coverage of last year's chaos in Minneapolis over immigration enforcement, which CBS denies. As a target of Mr. Pelley's slipshod journalism, I can say with certainty that at CBS News and 60 Minutes, there's long been a thumb on the scale for one political party, and it isn't the Republicans. When ugliness is the point, Graham Plattner and Ken Paxton advanced thanks to a small subset of voters. By Barton Swaim. In 1964, doctors removed a benign tumor from the lung of Randolph Churchill, the spoiled and reckless son of the former British Prime Minister. A typical triumph of modern science, remarked the novelist Evelyn Waugh, to find the only part of Randolph that was not malignant and removed it. If there is some non-malignant part of Graham Plattner's character, we have yet to hear about it. Mr. Plattner, Maine's Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate, has managed, however unintentionally, to make moral repugnance his chief point of salability. The vile, deranged social media post, the credible stories about his filthy musings and rough treatment of women, the Nazi death camp tattoo, of whose meaning the self-described military history buff claimed ignorance, it all seems to have enhanced his appeal to Democrats. Governor Janet Mills withdrew from the race in April because she trailed Mr. Plattner so badly, though her name remained on this week's ballot. But voters showed no interest in the far more electable David Costello, a well-spoken environmental policy consultant and by all appearances a normal guy. Each revelation, like the indictments of Donald Trump in 2023, failed to diminish Mr. Plattner's support and almost certainly solidified it, except that whereas Mr. Trump's indictments ranged from overwrought to preposterous and gave his supporters the sense that his enemies aimed to destroy him, the Plattner stories led readers to believe the man is a volatile oaf. A view aired frequently among left-leaning talking heads, including some who would rather not defend the Nazi tattoo guy, holds that Mr. Plattner found favor because Democrats in Maine and elsewhere want their own Donald Trump, someone prepared to break rules and offend genteel sensibilities in pursuit of progressive aims. That reasoning isn't crazy, but Mr. Trump had far more than boorishness to offer in 2015 to 16. He had been a media-savvy playboy celebrity for 30 years, and until his promotion of birtherism in 2011, a popular one. Mr. Trump also had a sui generis, unique set of emphases that resonated: border security and the return of manufacturing in 2016, border security again in opposition to woke totalitarianism in 2024. Mr. Plattner regrets the views of every other Bernie Sanders-aligned leftist in this election cycle, including the claim that Israel committed genocide in Gaza, a lie that accords nicely with his tattoo. What appeals to his supporters isn't the message, despite the ugliness, but the ugliness itself. Even so, Republican declarations of disbelief ring hollow, not least because the Texas GOP, in one of the most watched primary contests of 2026, nominated State Attorney General Ken Paxton, a man who wears scandal like a red satin jacket. Voters might have given Senator John Cornyn a fifth and presumably final term and got precisely the same votes on the big issues. But Lone Star Republicans chose to interpret Mr. Paxton's ethical hooliganism and penchant for liaisons as political virtues. 3 years ago, an investigation committee of the Texas House brought a dizzying array of impeachment charges against Mr. Paxton, among them the acceptance of bribes and the use of his office to protect a donor. Mr. Paxton denied wrongdoing and said the impeachment effort was engineered by his political enemies. No one wanted to know about the Attorney General's marital trouble, but he made that too public business. The impeachment alleged that Mr. Paxton benefited when the donor for whom he did legal favors took on the Attorney General's paramour as an employee. The Texas House, controlled by Republicans, voted overwhelmingly to impeach Mr. Paxton in 2023, suspending him from office. The Senate, also controlled by Republicans, voted narrowly to acquit him. His wife, of nearly 40 years, a state senator required to recuse herself from the vote, last year filed for divorce on biblical grounds. By then, the three-term Attorney General had won statewide re-election twice in 2018 and 2022 after having been indicted in 2015, his first year in office, for securities fraud. That case ground on nearly a decade and ended with no admission of wrongdoing, though the settlement required the Attorney General to pay $300,000 in restitution and undergo legal ethics training. Mr. Paxton supporters, when asked the reason for their enthusiasm, almost invariably use the word fight. The attitude behind that word would make more sense if Republicans didn't hold the White House and both chambers of Congress. I'm left to conclude that a vote for Mr. Paxton or for Mr. Plattner is less an expression of support for the candidate than one of perversity and irritation or maybe despair. All the important people, the political class, the media, call him a monster. He must be all right. That Mainers and Texans want fervently to send these troublemakers to the Senate is a fiction, made plausible by the system of popular primaries bequeathed us by early 20th century progressivism. The advancement of Plattner and